So, welcome to Tilting Assignments Part 2. It's fine if you haven't done Part 1, but we're going to talk about transparency in learning and teaching. I'm Jennifer Hitchcock. I'm normally a professor of English, but this year I'm a CETL Faculty Fellow for High Impact Practices. And for those that are here or those that might be watching this video, there's 2 QR codes here, one for resources, Tilt resources, and one for the CETL sign-in for the PDO. So, and of course, if you're watching this as a Zoom recording, you're welcome to pause the video at any point you want to. Okay, so we like to talk about, and we'll talk about this in relation to Tilt too, the purpose and learning outcomes of what you're doing. So what we're going to do today, we're going to identify some principles of transparency in learning and teaching, or TILT, define components of TILT, including purpose, task, and criteria, present some ideas for how to improve transparency in course assignments, develop strategies for gathering appropriate examples, and apply TILT's principles to one or more assignments. If we have time at the end, we can actually work on actual assignment that you might have and try to then apply these TILT strategies and principles, and then finally discover further TILT resources to help support work you might do beyond in your course. So why TILT? What are we talking about when we're talking about tilting? So what TILT is an evidence-based framework connected to the Reynolds flight path that's been shown to improve student learning, success, and retention when applied to at least 2 assignments. Now, back in January, at the in-service in January, we had brought Mary Ann Winklemas to the college, and she did a workshop. I don't know if, some people got to participate in that. And she is sort of the founder of TILT. There's been transparency in education, the theory of transparent assignment design has been around for longer, but Dr. Mary Ann Winklemas took these ideas about transparency and developed a specific framework that has then been studied to see its impact. And in these educational studies, they found that if you tilt at least 2 assignments in a course, then it showed a significant benefit to students. So the reason that is because when you tilt assignments, when you make them more transparent, this can help alleviate students' anxiety and confusion about what they're supposed to do, so they can focus on completing the course assignments and achieving the learning goals, rather than kind of wasting time being worried or confused. And then, even though when you do this, when you make your assignments more transparent, when you tilt them, it can take a little bit more planning time up front, but it also, in the long term, in theory, it helps save you time as an instructor in the long run, because you have to answer fewer student questions about those assignments, and your students tend to do better on them because they know more clearly what to do. So that's part of the idea of why we're doing this. And again, because it supports student learning, success, and retention, that also connects it to the new Reynolds flight path goals. So when we tilt an assignment, how do we do this? So there's 3 main parts. Those 3 parts have to do with making clear the purpose, the task, and the criteria for success. So these are the 3 parts. And in the resources I'm sharing with this, there's also, and including on Mary Ann Winklemas's website for TILT, you can find examples, templates, that kind of thing. But you can also, adapt them and make them your own to fit with your own assignments. I will also say this real quick. A lot of instructors, when I talk to them about tilting, they find, they're already doing a lot of this. It's just kind of best educational practice. It overlaps with a lot of best practices. But we'll kind of point out where are some places instructors often can go a little deeper into making it more transparent. So you'll notice some of this will be familiar, and you might say, well, I already do that. And that's great. A lot of us already do that. But some parts, I know when I started tilting, I did it somewhat, and then I had to kind of refine it over a couple of semesters and see where I could make it more clear. And we'll talk about other ways to improve the transparency. So purpose, when we say purpose, what does that mean? We need to make the purpose clear. So one aspect is clearly defining the learning objectives in language that students will recognize, help them recognize how this assignment will benefit their learning. And so this is the purpose is also the why. Why are you asking students to do this? So how does it relate to course learning outcomes? And also here it's useful to add some real world relevance too. How do these learning objectives connect with either institutional learning outcomes, or how might it connect with benefit students in their lives beyond the classroom? So, it's almost including the section on purpose early on in your assignment instructions is useful to sort of, persuade students why this is a useful and important assignment. And it's something that we often take for granted. We don't always explain clearly. So that's the first step, is to clarify and explain the why or the purpose. Next comes the task. And this is usually where you'd put most of the steps of assignment instructions. But you want to kind of, think more carefully and think about places in your instructions where you could add maybe a little more clear information, context, or break it down into clearer steps. So this includes defining what students should do using those Bloom taxonomy action verbs. List any guidelines or sequence. Specify mistakes to be avoided. I'll say this third one here. This is something I found really useful when I started trying to tilt my assignments, is I would add a whole section after the assignment instructions, put common mistakes to avoid. And that's because we all have, right? When we have a different assignments, there often are common mistakes that students make over and over. So putting that section, explaining what those are, also helps to direct students to that as you're reviewing an assignment. Or if a student makes one of those mistakes and you're grading the assignment, you can direct them back to that part. And when they notice that they didn't read it carefully the first time, maybe for the next assignment, they will be more sure to read all the instructions, including what to avoid. Now, some professors might say, well, I'm doing some type of problem-based learning, or I want students to not have all the information. I want them to be confused because it's part of the purpose of this assignment. That's fine. If you have a reason, a pedagogical reason, that you don't want to give students too much information, just explain that that's part of the purpose. So some type of statement such as, the purpose of this assignment is for you to struggle and feel confused while you test your own approach for addressing the problem, etc. Okay? Because again, you want to think about not only TILT is about not only being really clear with what you want students to do, why you want them to do it, but you want to remove those obstacles that often might cause students anxiety. So they can, instead of spending time being anxious, they can get started and just give a little context, a little explanation for what they should do, why they should do it. And sometimes it might include, for task, maybe listing steps of what students should do before they start on the assignment. Sometimes we assume that students will just know how to prepare for the assignment, so it's sometimes helpful to really to spell that out. And the reason TILT shows to improve student success, retention, it's also shown to really help promote equity. Because sometimes the students who might be first generation students, students from minoritized or underserved populations, they might be less likely to have the kind of background knowledge that would help them fill in the holes of an unclear assignment. So the clearer you can be in the steps of what you want students to do, the more students from different backgrounds will be able to complete the assignment successfully. And last but not least, you want to be clear about the criteria, this being the criteria for success. So clearly defining what are the characteristics of the finished product that you're looking for. What is that a successful assignment going to look like? Providing multiple examples can be helpful, including some examples of what these characteristics might look like in real world practice, and maybe even have students have a chance to look over some of the examples to prepare for the assignment and sort of analyze the examples and discuss what is good about this example, discuss those characteristics. And of course, the difference between excellent work and adequate work is important too. So maybe a checklist of characteristics. For examples, another thing to think about is some of those examples, they don't have to all be strong examples. You can include some weaker examples and then have students explain why those are weaker examples. And the idea being if you only include one student example that's a really strong example and that's it, then you have that students might try to kind of imitate that one example a little too much and be a little less critical thinking involved. But if you include a range of examples and if you include some real world examples, then students kind of have to look over different ones and really think more about what is similar and different in these different examples and help them to approach the assignment. And we'll talk about how to select examples later. Another important part that you don't want to overlook is also this reflection component. And this also ties into where we link tilting and also growth mindset and metacognition. So asking students to reflect not only before they start the assignment by looking at different examples, but reflecting on their completed graded work to encourage them to then see why they might have been less successful, where they might have, where they can improve and help them to adjust their learning strategies going forward. So that reflection component is also an important part of TILT. So I have, this is just a screenshot of a template that's available on the TILT website. You can also, I can show for a second here. Let me demonstrate what you can find by clicking. If you click here from this slide, this resource is also available at the end of the slides. But let me show you what is available on this website. So if you click on the link that takes you to the TILT Higher Ed website, especially, you can learn more about TILT, what it means. This is the website developed by Mary Ann Winklemas. And then there's also this examples and resources. And I think this might be actually where the direct link takes you. There's also some useful videos here if you want to learn more about TILT here, we're talking about it. But also example assignments. And you can see some examples from different disciplines of assignments that are less transparent and more transparent. So that kind of strong and weak examples, well, she's sort of doing that for you. She's giving strong and weak examples of assignments based on what's more or less transparent and based on, from a variety of different subject areas. So you can see how to apply these principles in your discipline. There's other tools for teachers here. So there's a lot of great stuff if you have time to just browse around the site and see what's available. There's also, tools for students as well. Okay, so there's some student-facing material too. So anyway, I just wanted to show there's a lot of great stuff there that you can access from clicking on that assignment. Okay, so let's go back here. Okay, and again, it'll take you to that website if you click on this link right here. So I'm going to take a stop here and take a couple minutes. I'm going to pause the recording here in a minute. And if you're watching this as a Zoom recording, you can pause it and do this little kind of brainstorming activity on your own. Just take a few minutes, I said 3, however many minutes you have, to write down some of your thoughts and reflections about which of your assignments from your courses and which parts of those assignments students seem to most often struggle with. Which of your assignments do students get confused about and which parts of those seem most confusing? Then, if you want to bounce it off, ideas with a colleague, if you have enough folks, you meet with a partner, a small group, and share ideas. If we have time, you can also access, if you have time before we discuss it, you can access a copy of the assignment you're talking about. And so we can talk about the actual assignment and actually discuss parts where you think students seem to get confused, so we can talk about how to make those parts more transparent. So again, you can always stop the recording and take a few minutes to do this. And I'm going to pause it here. So we talked about with some folks here about assignment ideas, and one thing that came up that I wanted to mention is, you sometimes want to be concise in certain parts of the assignment, so there is that tension between concision and being clear and specific. So an option in some cases is to include hyperlinks to more detailed instructions for some parts of an assignment. Also, you can just hyperlink right in Canvas to examples, different types of examples for whatever type of assignment it is. So again, think about your own assignments and what ways you could make them more transparent. So kind of revisiting one thing to do, and this is where some folks do get stuck in certain types of assignments or disciplines. Some folks have a hard time thinking about, well, what could I find as a real world example? Because ideally, again, you want multiple examples as part of the criteria sort of at the end of the assignment, so students can see what you're looking for, see what to do and what not to do. Again, those strong and weak examples, but those real world examples. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this goes for either past student examples or real world examples. They don't have to be exactly the same as your assignment. As long as some aspect of the example is similar to some aspect of your assignment, and you then add a little context or explanation or maybe annotation to explain what the student should be looking at in that assignment that's similar, how it's similar to your assignment. So it's okay, in some cases, you might even just pull out a single paragraph or just 2 slides of a longer slide presentation and say, here's part of what you want to do and here's why. So it doesn't, that helps to find examples. They don't have to match 100% of all parts of your assignment. Just make sure you explain how they match, how they're similar and different. So thinking about for a minute, to take another minute here to think about, can you think of some types of real world examples that could demonstrate one or more characteristics of one of your major assignments? And then where could you find examples like this? And you can go ahead and pause the recording here to take a minute to think about this. Okay. So we were talking here about, someone here was talking about a group presentation that involved doing a slide presentation and whatnot, and it was a great idea to find maybe some YouTube videos that could be a real world model. In addition to, of course, using past student examples, removing students' names, of course. I also gave the example as an English professor using published articles and essays to help as real-world examples for some of my essay assignments. And even if it's not exactly the same, just explaining to students those similarities and differences. And we can start on some of this here, and this can be something that y'all take to work on after if you've been asked to tilt those 2 assignments. So this is kind of how you can work on that. And I know a lot of folks, especially Gateway Math and English, have been asked to do this. Other folks maybe just start thinking about it or work on at least one assignment. Of course, if you kind of notice as we talk about this, you could do this to almost anything. And some people talk about tilting their syllabus to make it more clear, tilting committee tasks. So you can apply these strategies to anything, not beyond just assignments. But to get the really significant impact, it's helpful to apply these strategies to at least 2 assignments in a course. So it can be applied to almost any communication with your students. Your Canvas site, you can try to tilt your Canvas site, tilt your syllabus, and so on. So what you can do is choose an assignment from one of your courses to try to start working on this if you haven't already. So you start with the assignment, review that assignment, think about how you can break down the instructions into sections of such as purpose, task, and criteria, including, remember, a common mistakes to avoid section in the instructions. And again, you don't have to necessarily put every single part of the instructions there. You can also hyperlink to additional information for students who need it. And then, of course, after you're working on those sections, the last part of the criteria is identifying and gathering those strong and weak examples, including real-world examples. And if you don't have student examples, it's something you can start collecting now. And of course, letting students know that you're going to do that is helpful, and assuring them you would remove any identifying information before you use it in the course. But students usually appreciate the examples, so they're typically happy to let you use their work. But again, it's best practice to remove names, especially if the work is not, the best example, for example. Let's see, we can also show some examples here, what this might look like. Okay, so what we did here, let me go back to this page. So if you click on that link on that previous slide, it takes you to some different examples, and we're looking here at example assignments. So you can find examples from the TILT website of various subject areas. And so we were going to pick one that relates to biology. And so what you find when you click on these examples, usually it starts with a less transparent example, so kind of a weaker assignment that's not tilted enough, where they could be clear about some of the steps they want students to do that might include some parts that might confuse students. And then below that, a more transparent assignment that includes the different sections that TILT stresses, such as the purpose section, the task section, and then down here, the criteria section. And again, you don't have to, this is a template that you can use these examples. There's also a template that just includes explanations of what you would do in each section. But you can adapt it and make it your own. You can change the layout a little bit. You don't have to copy it exactly. This is for instructors to use to work with, to see what it might look like. And then showing more examples. So again, some of this you can include hyperlinks to additional resources, but you might find these examples to be helpful, especially finding some on this website that are related to whatever subject area that you're teaching. And again, we found that link to the examples by clicking this right here to the TILT website. Okay. So at the end of the slides, I do have additional resources for TILT. The top one does take you to that same website. So if you can find it there in addition to the other one, and that would be here. Then we've got some other, university pages that deal with transparency in assignment design. There's also an article here, and if you go to the resources or this QR code, I've got additional, not only can you find these slides, but there's also some examples, templates, and a page of research. So if you're a type of person who's interested in looking at the studies and the research that shows the benefits of TILT, I've also gathered various articles about that. And please keep in mind, you can always reach out to me. What I do as part of my fellowship, in addition to running workshops, I do individual one-on-one meetings with instructors where I can, walk you through how to tilt your assignments. I can give you feedback once you're trying to tilt it. If you want to share what you've done with me, I can give you feedback on it as well. So just keep that in mind. And you can find all the slides there from those resources. There's also a short survey for attending the flow. And folks that are here, if you want to stay after, we can talk more about any questions you have and talk more about your assignments if you like.